Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt, once again from Divination Counseling Service, here to do a continuation of our Hellenistic astrology. I'm trying to keep the supplements a little short. Hopefully, I don't go even as long as I did on Tuesday. I kind of wanted to pick up where I left off. So I wanted to make a note here that I will continue with my diurnals and I will continue with relationship charts, but I wanted to wait until I had a better diurnal to work with. And what I mean by that is we can go and look up lottery winners and we already have an example of one, but I really don't believe the time was good. So in the original natal chart, not necessarily of the day he won. So what I'm really doing right now is kind of being on the lookout for somebody who has a good chart, who wins. So I have very few to pick from in my pool, but it is something that I am considering. There is an option that I have that I can work with, that I might start working with. Again, it's not a good chart. This has always been a real hang up for a lot of astrologers, myself included. I've learned through the years how to work with what is referred to as a sun chart, which means using a noon time as the date, the time of birth. But the problem is when you get to the diurnals, the accuracy of the natal chart becomes much more important and significant. So I will get back to it, I promise. The same thing with the relationship charts. I've got a lot of information on different business partnerships, very much worth looking at. It's just that right now I seem to be in a real phase where I really want to continue looking at the Hellenistic. And I know that we'll be doing Hellenistic, and then after that, it's going to be the rectification work with the president's chart. So I have so much I want to share with you. And we are going to do it all in small increments, which means we're going to have a lot of continued part 3, part 4 type stuff. So I apologize ahead of time. So before I begin getting into what it is I really want to look at today, I want to say thank you for watching the video. I particularly want to thank all of the people who are really doing a lot to help me build this channel. Thank you all. It is a small channel, but we are growing, and I think that by my dedication, hopefully, to the education of astrology rather than the fluff, I'm going to eliminate fluff for the time being, which is the astrology card readings and things that are a broader stroke. Now, I might get back to daily astrology. That was not fluff, ironically. It was a lot of work. But if I do, and when I do, it'll probably be done as a subscription basis, which means you would pay a nominal fee a month in order to get those daily predictions. So I am working on getting that up and running again. It may take me a minute. I've got so much on my plate right now, but I am looking forward to getting back to it. So today I'm going to, again, reintroduce the book I'm working with. It's called Hellenistic Astrology. It's written by Chris Brennan. He is a student of the Kepler School. A lot of what's in here is based in a lot of the research by other Kepler faculty members. So Kepler is a college in Seattle, Washington, I believe, and Kepler College does specialize in astrology. It is the only one of its kind in this country. Now, I know that the Hamburg School in Germany, that's been around for a long, long time, and they have a wonderful reputation. So there are astrology schools peppered throughout the world, and I do believe that's only going to get better. So that's a little bit of good news. So I would say, as I look at this book, and one of the things that I talked about last time was the rise and the fall. I think we're on a steady uphill climb now, and considering that we're going into the age of Aquarius, that's what we're embarking on. And as I've stated more than once on the last video, I do believe we're going to be noting this time as one of those times we're going to make a step as a culture, as an evolution. And in that next step, I believe things like spirituality, astrology, those kinds, even tarot, those kinds of empowering tools that help us to get in touch with who we are and to help us to feel better about who we are, those subject matters are on the rise, and I think they will be really important in the next age. And I think we can expect, with that said, a lot of really wonderful breakthroughs in the next age. Okay, so where I left off, because gosh knows we can talk, where I left off was that we were talking about what the names of the planets were, how, just a little review, the sun, known as Helios in Greek, known to be fiery, intelligent light, Selene, the moon, reflection of light, Hermes, which is Mercury, the twinkling one, Aphrodite, which is Venus, the light bearer, Aries, which is Mars, the fiery one, and Zeus, which is Jupiter, the radiant one, Kronos, which is Saturn, the shining one. So just a little review of those things. I think I explained last time that some of the Greek names, like Kronos and Zeus, are both trans-Neptunians, and they're also asteroids. So there is a real connection here. This is, again, Hellenistic astrology is the base work for all of us. Okay. All right. So, as I begin this new video, I want to talk about how, first of all, I left it off, and I want to review this as well, just because I have a marked new video, but this is actually a review. This is also about the original interpretations that are still used today with some modifications. And I did go through that last week. There's a lot of areas we don't agree, but remember that astrology is a much bigger subject matter now, and that astrology, we have, because of telescopes and a bunch of other things, we can see a whole lot more in the night sky, or in the sky in general, than we could during the rise of the Hellenistic astrology. So, continuing from the interpretations of what is known as the wandering stars. That's what they call them. We know them as planets. We also have a concept known as diurnal and nocturnal in the Hellenistic system. Diurnal are day charts. Nocturnal is obviously a night chart, or a night, considered night birth. You know, it's really interesting though, when does and hopefully I can explain this a little bit, because even to me going through this, I may have at another time in my life had a slightly different interpretation on diurnal and nocturnal charts. So this is not my first rodeo going through this information. However, I thought it was really interesting how they're viewing it. So I'll get to that in a minute. I do want to talk about, just very quickly, before I get to nocturnal and diurnal charts, which will be the highlight of what I'm talking about today. I do want to point out that Mercury, which is going to always come up in every conversation because it's always the odd ball, okay? Mercury is noted to be a companion to the sun. And I did talk about how it's considered, or it came about because of merchants, mercantile, and all of that, and how it's associated. Okay. One of the things I think I left off with is that Mercury is always seen as neutral, but we cannot ever get away from the fact that Mercury is also said to be the most easily influenced energies in our charts. That means that if another energy comes in, sun and moon comes to mind right away, then it can be a more benefit to that neutral energy. By the same token, you know, the others, for other signs, like with Saturn, for example, it might lessen, it might make it a little bit more malefic. So the, it's also interesting because even when Mercury shows up with Jupiter, it makes Jupiter actually considered neutral. I don't know if I get that. So I'm going to be straight on that, okay? Because Jupiter's always expansion. Jupiter, Mercury would probably talk a lot. So I'm just kind of throwing some stuff out there. But I did want to bring it up because it showed up in my notes. So the idea of what is the difference between night and day is known as a sect. S-E-C-T. It's called a sect, okay, in Hellenistic astrology. And the sect is that distinction between a diurnal chart or a nocturnal chart. And a lot of reason why it becomes very important, whether it's a day or a night chart, is because it affects the benefics and the malefics, which means that, and I'm going to explain this a little bit better, but this is where Hellenistic astrology, in my opinion, gets a little bit more complicated. And this is the stuff that some of the modern astrologers who've been studying at Kepler and other places where they're really going back and studying the history of astrology, this is where they're like picking this work back up again. And I think it's like something I'm interested in because in my family, all of us kids were day babies, okay? But I don't know if I'm really considered a day baby or if I think it's one of my other siblings, because even though my sun falls very, very close to the ascendant, it's still coming in from the 12th house. So we'll talk about that, okay? Whereas my daughter, who was born at night, might actually have a day chart. So because of where her sun falls. So it's incredibly important, I think, to really understand the rules of the sect, okay? And I'm going to try to explain that to the best of my ability. But somehow I feel like anyone out there ever studied cosmobiology, well, in particular, the house system for the Hamburg school, okay, the Uranian house system. Boy, it's a phenomenal system. Very complicated, in my opinion. So I feel a little similarly towards sex. I feel like there's rules that apply here, and you've got to understand all the rules in order for it to work correctly. Okay, so sex is one of the, and like I say, it's sort of something that people are dabbling in and coming back, but it's one of the only things that is not used in modern astrology. And I'm going to be perfectly frank. I've studied a lot of modern astrology with a lot of different teachers. Okay, I can think of 3 right here, just sitting here. Not one of them ever concerned themselves with a nocturnal or diurnal charts. As a matter of fact, we were playing with diurnal charts and calling them daily angles. Okay, but then I find out the daily angles are actually something where you're kind of manipulating the math a little bit and precessing the time. Okay, and I know that's, now I'm really getting off in the different arena, but we really don't use them. We really don't use the whole concept of night or day. So I do want to point that out. You know, it's interesting, when we work with the asteroids, we don't really use even sign energy as much, but you really do have to know that. It's just interesting how some things don't seem like they're applicable, but you have to have that knowledge in the background. And that's one of the reasons why I feel it's really important to kind of look at Hellenistic astrology, even if I don't completely 100% understand everything. I need to know more of where my stuff comes from. Okay, so, all right, so then so modern astrology is not using them. Okay. So let's just talk about this. They, in Hellenistic astrology, put these on 2 teams, the day team and the night team. Okay? And the day team, I know this is going to shock y'all, is led by the sun, and the night team is led by the moon. Duh. Okay? Jupiter and Saturn are considered diurnal or day, whereas Venus and Mars are considered nocturnal. Now, I'm going to talk about Mars before we end all this, but really, you know, we still deal with feminine and we still deal with masculine energies. And even though Mars is considered nocturnal, it is actually considered a masculine. Okay, so I do want to reiterate that. Even though Saturn is daytime, because of the Capricorn influences, I think it would be considered nighttime. So here we go again with, it's very confusing if you've already studied other traditions. Okay, so to me it is. I've been studying this stuff for so long. Okay, now in the last 20 years, a lot of this technique has gained credibility, but I do look at it like a technique, which is very much how I look at the Uranian house system. And whenever you look at a technique, it has rules and regulations. Okay, I even studied technique in dance, not as because I was a ballerina, but because a modern dancer benefits from the knowledge of the past. The same reason I'm studying Hellenistic astrology as an astrologer. Okay, so basically, how do you determine a day chart from a night chart? Well, it's the sun. The sun determines a night versus day chart, depending on where the sun falls in a chart. Anything below is a day chart. Anything above is a night chart. But it's not as clear when it comes to the time when the moon would take over and the chart becomes nocturnal. So you could go with sunrise and sunset, but I'm not sure that's exactly what they did. And as a baby who was born, well, of course, I'm a winter baby, but even though I was born in the morning hours, and I'm not talking early morning, I'm talking like 7 something, okay? I am still above the horizon in my chart, maybe only by 2 degrees. But what kind of chart does that give me? And this is one of the big confusions that I have, because my brother and my sister, and of course I used my family when I studied, we're all around the same place. So some of us fell slightly below the horizon, and I am the only one I think is slightly above the horizon. So it's just really interesting. My brother and sister are what you would refer to as first house suns. I grew up in a family of first house suns. So anybody who knows what that means, it means that I was the ugly duckling and that the rest of the family was really attractive. But when you understand as an astrologer, it's not quite so bad. Okay, so the sun is going to be our factor. And, excuse me, it's also involved in, okay, so I'm just going to go through the way they set up the teams. That the sun, Jupiter, Saturn are all part of the diurnal team. And on the diurnal team, the sun is the light. Jupiter is the benefic. Saturn is the malefic. Jupiter is neutral. We go to the nocturnal team, and the moon is the light. It's a reflected light. It's nighttime. Venus is the benefic. Mars is the malefic. And once again, Mercury is neutral. But they do point out that Mercury belongs to the sun during the day and Mercury belongs to the moon at night. And again, this is not tradition. I mean, this is tradition, but it's not a tradition that a lot of modern astrologers are yet, mind the word yet, are not yet familiar with. Okay, so then they talk about, we'll get back to that. I'm going to kind of move on here a bit. And I got to get rid of the notes I've already done, so because I'll repeat. Okay, so there's a bonification and maltreatment. That's actually a chapter. Well, a sub of a chapter. And I'll give you an example. When Venus, which equals marriage, now remember, this is Hellenistic, all right? Remember, we're doing relationship charts. I talk about Venus, but Venus is a small sliver of what we look for in relationship charts. So I just want to bear that in mind. Venus equals marriage. If Venus is with Jupiter, it would be a yes to a marriage. But if Venus is with Mars or Saturn, it would be a no to marriage, or that person might not find somebody, or, okay. I don't know how much I agree with that, because I have my personal, a very strong inconjunct, well, it's not real strong, but it's pretty inconjunct Mars. And I have a square, from a very sharp square, like to the degree, with Jupiter. And I have always been in a partnership. I'm not going to say with the same person, but I have had success in that my marriage was over 20 years long, and the present man that I'm living with, both of us agreed not to get married because we're older, is 14 years. So I don't do, obviously, my Venus, as affected as it is, doesn't qualify. So I don't understand this at all. Okay. And I'm just going by mine. I could move on and talk about a few other stuff that I know. And I'm not sure. Somebody who might know this information could say why that is the way it is. But I do have a lot of squares on Venus. It's actually part of a T-squares in my chart. And it just seems odd that I fall into this category of always being with a partner. And yet I don't think my Venus is very well aspected. So I don't know. I'm just passing on this information. And this is stuff that's up for discussion. And this is how we learn and expand on our knowledge. Okay. Continuing along the lines, I'm going to kind of jump here. I'm going to go back to Mercury again. Mercury is like this huge, well, then it turns into Mars. But it seems like, when you get to those middle, those really faster moving personal planets, they do have a lot to say about them, which I think is pretty interesting. One of the things that I really wanted to talk about with regards to Mercury, and I think that we did cover this now that I look at it. Okay, no, I didn't. Oh, I'm terrible. Wow. Okay. I think that, one of the things that we have to realize is that even though they had this really strong, stringent benefics, malefics, that they had, what was it called again? Bonification and maltreatment. They really did point out, as we know as astrologers, that nothing is really all good or bad, because they do talk about how they depending on the virtue of the sign and the placement changes everything. Well, and I can go you one better. As we deal with asteroids and the asteroids come into the whole thing, it really is amazing how much it changes everything. It's like, okay, you have this, just like I just talked to you about this whole marriage thing. My Venus is like clobbered, but it is clobbered, meaning that it surely is not standing alone. Does that have anything to do with it? Because stand alone, you might have a completely different story. Okay. Okay. So I went through all of that. I'm just going to kind of breeze through just to make sure I've gone through everything. I do like the fact that they think the sun and moon are neutral qualities. They're like what they call functional. Okay. And just a couple of things. And I did talk about the sky and why they said that Venus and Jupiter were benefic and why Saturn and Mars were considered malefic, and it had to do with their color in the sky. But one of the things, and I don't think I went through this, was the opposites. I don't think we got that far. Again, example, Venus is love, Mars is hate. I don't think Mars has, I think it's aggression. I don't think it has this is just my opinion as an astrologer. It's not a thinking source. Mars is not really emotional either. I mean, it's just like action. But it's interesting because I'm giving you their interpretation. Venus is love, Mars is hate. Jupiter is freedom, where Saturn is imprisonment. Venus is an acquisition of money, and Mars takes away one's possessions. Jupiter is wisdom, Saturn is ignorance. Jupiter is childbirth, Saturn is childless. Venus is marriage, Saturn is unmarried or widowed. Venus is friendships, Jupiter is alliances and friends, and Saturn is separation of friends and war. This idea of benefic and malefic have the ability to influence other planets in a positive or negative way. I just wrote that all down because there is validity in there. I do not totally agree. I think that Saturn is not ignorance. I think Saturn is discipline. I think Saturn is wisdom. So here we go. I think Jupiter is expansive and risk-taking. So this is just set up, I think, as a parameter. If we're bringing back that idea of the malefics, I don't think it's going to wash really well, particularly not in communities where we're using trans-Neptunians and asteroids to further delineate whether an energy is positive or negative. And I'm going to give just a little, I gave someone a lecture this morning. Actually, I was talking to two people about astrology this morning, but one of which really does apply here. She was referring to squares. I probably have more squares in my chart than any astrologer has ever seen. I've actually been told that by astrologers. I am an astrologer. Squares are not bad. Squares give us energy. Do they make it easy? No, they make it difficult. But where does the energy come from? Creativity couldn't happen without conflict. You see how you need both things. You need all things to make life work. And that's a really important concept. So I don't think of Venus as being purely positive. As a matter of fact, it can be quite selfish. I don't think of Jupiter as being all wise and wisdom because, let's be honest, in our optimism, we often make the worst decision because we don't think it through. And here we go with that. Action without thought is a lot about Mars. So hate, that's a little extreme. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying I disagree with them. I'm saying that as an astrologer for probably a half a century, I can't always, I read this stuff and then I go and I smile because I'm a little bit further along, and to look at this as the be-all end-all would be very hard for me to do. And I think what's really great is that some of the people who are thinking about studying Hellenistic astrology or even getting this book, and I do really encourage it, they already are astrologers. So I think that if you're already, even if you're a student of astrology, then it would be okay because you have your own ideals and this will help you expand on those ideas. But you can't take this as if it were a Bible, okay? Okay, so a sect, diurnal, nocturnal, is a qualitative factor that alters benefic and malefic. And maybe it's the fact that I have a nighttime chart. Because remember, I'm 2 degrees above the ascendant, that perhaps that's why my Venus is reflecting the way that it is. So there's a lot of question there. And that would be a really good topic of discussion. Sects help us identify the most positive and negative in a chart. Well, one of the things that I've heard this called is a weighing system, and that weighing systems are a part of like solar fire. You can get the weight of, they call it a weight. And I wonder if that's also related to positive and negative. See, this is where I go with some of this stuff. My mind starts going with it. Okay. So then it's also about the planets. Okay, so if you have a planet, okay, that is that belongs to a different sect, okay, and okay, I just did it with Venus, okay, so maybe it wouldn't have worked in my favor had I had my sun below that horizon instead of above it, okay. Um, there, while those that are contrary to the sect work against the sect. So in other words, if that Venus with all of its problems had, like I say, come in a different, I would have a very different situation. And this is where the real understanding of astrology would come in, even if you were a Hellenistic astrologer. If you were an ancient astrologer and you were, and I know there's people that are really good at this stuff and they could probably explain this to me. Okay, so here's the other on top of this. Variants, which include masculine and feminine. Okay, so so you have what is going to change a sect, not only not or affect a sect, might be the gender affiliated with that sign. So in other words, if it's in a certain sign, it would be. Okay. So again, masculine signs do better with the supposedly with the daytime chart, and feminine signs are associated more with nocturnal charts. And this grew in popularity in the later Hellenistic years. So in the later periods. Now, I don't know when those are because honestly, it took like a nosedive after the 600s or the 700s and got itself isolated to specific countries. So I'm not sure if they're referring to how important it was at that point in history, or if it was the 12th century after the second or during the Second Crusades, when Hellenistic astrology finds once again it's in its rise, only to fall back a few steps during the Renaissance period. But again, I'm so surprised that it wasn't bigger in the Renaissance period. And the one thing I can tell you as an astrologer in modern day is that astrology, and I've been for many, many years, many decades, and astrology is something that goes through highs and lows, and that when things are really good for people, when society is doing well, sometimes astrology doesn't do as well. I often say it's funny how my business does really well when the world is not good. It's almost as though I'm like a doctor and you only come to see me when you're sick. Okay. So that's a factor. It's also referring to the fact that the zodiac itself is divided into two hemispheres. And the Leo through Capricorn is all said to be diurnal. And then Aquarius through Cancer is nocturnal. And that too is kind of interesting because that too tells me that my chart is not, I'm an Aquarius, so my chart is not day but night, or I would do better at night. Interesting, okay? Variants include sex of the sign. In other words, you're looking at Venus, but you have to consider the sign of that Venus. You must. Mine is in Aquarius. So I'm using myself as an example just to kind of show you because that's where my questions were. So then it goes on and it says that the sign is determined by what rules that sign. So in my case, Uranus. But no, Venus is ruled by Saturn if I were going by Hellenistic because of Aquarius. Uranus has not yet been discovered. That's going to take several hundred years because they don't even discover Uranus, I think, until the early 20th century, which is when astrology really makes a comeback. And it's no surprise because to some astrologers, Uranus rules astrology. I think of Uranus as ruling astrology, but really Urania does because Urania is logical thought. But Uranus is also considered. So if you have a a sun, if you have an Apollon Uranus in your chart, Apollon being business, astrology would be considered Uranus. Okay. But you could also be a computer programmer, especially with even that Urania. Okay. So masculine and feminine is where I want to end this today. And, you know, it's about that giving of light, reflecting of light. Here we go again. But it's really interesting because the zodiac divides the two hemispheres, Leo through Cap, are said to be daytime. You know as well as I do that the way, if you're an astrologer, the way they do it is Aries is masculine, Taurus is feminine, Gemini is masculine. Do you see where I'm going? Cancer is feminine. I could keep going. Leo is masculine. Okay. Virgo is feminine. Every other sign is said to be feminine. Every other sign is said to be masculine. So this is where there's a little conflict of interest because Pisces, according to the variants of this Hellenistic astrology, would be nocturnal. And it's feminine. But so would Aquarius. But Aquarius is very masculine. So you see where it gets like a little bit of a question mark there. And again, I'm still studying the book. I'm still studying. But I did want to look at that. The feminine and masculine stuff to me is almost logical because maybe because I've been using astrology for so much, but they call the sun, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars all masculine. Well, I can agree with that. Okay, I can agree with that. And then, of course, the moon and Venus would be feminine. But a lot of that changes when you add in Pluto, because I think Pluto is very feminine. Okay, not the best qualities of feminine either, but it's quite feminine. And so is Neptune, quite feminine with all of its compassion and its imagination. It's so feminine. Uranus would still be masculine, okay? But you can see that those last three, two of them would then be joining the feminine round here, okay? So I think that's really important to look at as well. And when you are looking at feminine and masculine, it isn't just the actual sun, moon. It's not the planet, the personal point, or any of that that you're looking at. You have to really consider the sign of that energy, because a Cancerian Venus is a heavy-duty feminine, whereas an Aquarius Venus is a kind of almost a neutral, because the Venus might be feminine, but the Aquarius is quite masculine. So, and that's my interpretation. I know that Aquarius is still considered nocturnal according to the ways of the Hellenistic astrology. It would be worth, again, it would be worth my while to do more research into exactly how that is divvied up. So I'm actually, I've been talking a little bit longer than I wanted, but I did a little better than last time. I'm going to pick this up again, because I'm going to keep going with this. I think there's so much in here. We're going to pick it up with masculine and feminine and getting to that rising and setting again, and the morning star versus the evening star. And I'll get to more of that as we then go into the signs of the zodiac. We did the planets. We're going to complete the planets. We're going to move on to the signs. And that's where I hope to get into the exaltations and the rulerships. Yes, that is next. So that'll be our next round. And I don't know. It depends on how many charts I find. It might be next week that I'm still discussing history. Let's just see. Hopefully this was informative. Please comment. You know, I love hearing from you guys. I love that there is an interest in this. I think it's fabulous. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this video. And as always, till we meet again, I wish you only happy readings.